Today I've got my photography hat on and I'm going to talk a bit about cameras and photography. Now I paint pictures and I honestly don't really see photography as an art, more of a craft. Well, not for most of us. So when the man with the first cave with some sort of skin hanging up on the doorway or entrance or hole or whatever you like to call it, found that it had developed a hole, he noticed upside down on the back of the cave was projected the view outside. This is an optical effect, and where it's used, it's called in a camera a pinhole lens or a pinhole camera, and the light goes in a straight line from the top left to the bottom right and appears on the wall. As time went on, people used mirrors and lenses and tried to focus the light more accurately. And sometime in the mid-1800s, light-sensitive chemicals were developed. So you could coat a bit of glass or a bit of paper with a chemical and you could expose it to light. Obviously you had to mix your chemical up in the dark, and the bit that had been exposed to light dissolve, change colour, whatever you like, and you could stick it in another chemical to stop the light doing any more dissolving, and we got this stuff called film. It's I don't know whether we've got any film. Did have, it's gone. Anyway, back in the day we used film cameras, and so you have a lens, you have a shutter that opens and shuts so that you can have light on the film for a period of time, and that's the most simple camera. The most simple sophisticated camera, that's a funny way of looking at it, was a thing called an SLR, and slowly a camera developed where you could change the lenses, where you could look through the viewfinder and see out of the lens you were going to take the photograph through. It's a complicated piece of kit. Here's one of mine. Right, it's not exactly state of the art now. In its day it was thought to be quite a good camera. So the light goes in through the front, comes out through the back, and there's a thing on the top called a pentaprism, which I think this one might come off. Oh yes, so you've got this pentaprism thing, and inside it's got a prism. I don't know what you'll see if you look in the prism, perhaps what's on the desk, don't know. If you look through the prism out of the lens, not very much. And in the top of the camera you've got a little screen, and if I wave my hand underneath, nothing happens. Well perhaps it's not going to. Doesn't seem to make any difference. Doesn't like that very much. I don't think, there's my hand. We could just about trick it. So there's a lens on the front, right, there somewhere, and you can unscrew the lens and in the back of the camera, you can get the back off somehow. You have to press a button and pull another one, which I can't remember under the camera. So inside you've got a shutter, and I think if I turn the shutter speed right down, so there's the shutter, and you can see when you press the button the shutter will open and that exposes the film. We'll do that again so you can see the shutter open, so you can see the shutter, I hope. It's a bit quick, wasn't it? Would it go any slower? There. Oh, there we go. So this is a fairly slow shutter speed, may look quick to you. You may be able to see me through it. So we're getting the idea here. Yep. So the shutter, when you press the button, opens. And obviously the longer the shutter's open for, the more the film's exposed. So that's one of the variables, and on a camera, if you look on this camera here, it's usually denoted by the symbol S. You can't see that very well. Ah, yes. So when it's talking about shutter, and in this case it's shutter priority, because this is a digital camera, for speed. So you have to be very clear, the speed of the shutter, the longer the shutter's open for, the more light gets on the film, so the more the film's exposed. The other thing that you have is this lens that screws on the front. And if I put the lens on here, you should be able to see. I have to get the right knob here for this. Oh, right. So you can see, oh, maybe you can't actually. Oh yes, you can see inside the lens there's a hole you can make bigger and smaller. There's a setting on the side, which, can you see it? Oh, there we go. And you see it's graduated there, 16, 11, 8, 5.6. The smaller the hole, the bigger the number. So, and the numbers equate to what we call a stop. So obviously the bigger the hole, the more light is going to appear on the film. And so you've got these two variables. Another variable really was the speed of the film. So the more light sensitive the chemical, the faster the film. Right, so we've got the shutter speed, how long the shutter is open for. We've got the aperture, the variable hole in the lens, and we've got the speed of the film. And these things all appear on digital cameras in some way or another. Most phone cameras you can get to these settings. So it is important that you understand that you've got these three settings and they all have a payoff. So the faster the film, or in the case of a digital camera, the higher you set the digital sensor, the grainier it will be. So the slower it is, the less grain you get, the faster it is, the grainier it is, but the more sensitive to light. With the shutter speed, what you're talking about really is camera shake and movement. So the faster the shutter speed, the more you will freeze things and the less you will be aware of your shaky hands. And the longer the lens, the more camera shake shows up. So if you have a lens that works like a telescope, telephoto lens, you have to have a fairly fast shutter speed. Whereas if you've got an ordinary lens that you get on most cameras, the shutter speed is not so fast. Now there are a lot of numbers involved in this, and we'll come back to them later. The camera or your phone or whatever is bristling with numbers, but first of all you have to understand the relationships. And the third thing is your hole in the lens. That's the aperture. And obviously the bigger the aperture, the more light you can get in. But the thing with aperture is the smaller the aperture, the bigger the depth of field. And the depth of field is the area you've got in focus. So if you've got a smaller aperture, you can get things that are close up in focus at the same time as the horizon. And these relationships are important. Sometimes it's a nuisance, but another time the actual snags are beneficial. So for instance with portrait shots, there's a tendency to try to make the portrait of the person sharp and the background a bit fuzzy. So you tend to use a bigger aperture to bring the depth of field down so that only the person's face is in focus. With sports photography, you very often will follow the camera with a fairly slow shutter speed to the thing you're, I don't know, you might be filming a car going around a track. So you get the camera to follow, use a slow shutter speed, and you can blur the back and make it look like the car's going fast. So there are advantages, but on the whole, getting as much light in as you can seems to produce the best pictures. Anyway, I'm stopping there now, and we'll come back to another one of these another time. You can have too much information. Remember what they say, and never trust a hippie.